If you're new to our channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.
The advantages and disadvantages to both traditional row gardening and square foot gardening. Square foot gardening versus traditional row gardening, what is the best for you and what should you start doing?
So in row planting, this is evenly spaced vegetables planted in a tidy bed. It's when you're planting in rows, essentially. You're going to have, say you're planting beets, you're going to maybe choose a bed, 2 rows of beets, space them about 4 inches apart, and then when you plant them in, the rows are about a foot apart.
Yeah, we get this from traditional big ag industry. This has been passed down, years and years and years ago. The farmers' wives or farmers mimicked that particular type of layout in their backyard garden. Okay, so. And then square foot, let's talk about square foot gardening first.
So square foot gardening is a practice of growing into small square foot sections, which is a 12-foot square, and it's to assist the planting and creating of small but intensely planted vegetable garden. So it's a little bit more intense, and it's not as traditional. However, it's a very great concept.
Right. Mel Bartholomew, I'm not pronouncing that name correctly, he developed this particular method of gardening back in the 60s, 70s. He has recently passed away in the last year and a half. He wrote the book, The Square Foot Garden Book, which is the most sold gardening book in world history. And it's a concept that has allowed millions upon millions of people to garden that were never able to garden before, because everybody believed that you needed a big field or a big backyard in order to grow anything.
Right. He definitely brought it more applicable to urban people and to people who have smaller backyards or maybe want to grow in a raised bed, something like that. But definitely. So about it is that it's super productive. Intensive planting means larger yield from smaller spaces. So if you have limited space, it's definitely great. It's fast to set up.
This can be done in a raised bed,
right,
or a large container. Mm-hmm. The concept is the same, and it produces a lot. And let's define this a little bit more. Square foot gardening. Let's say a 4 by 4 foot raised bed or 4 by 4 foot spot in the garden, in the ground. Each square foot represents essentially a mini garden. So each square foot, 1 square foot, you can put 16 carrots, 16 radishes. Another square foot, you can plant 9 onions in a square foot, 1 tomato in 1 square foot. So essentially, you have 16 gardens in 1 4 by 4 foot square area.
And I think that's what the attractiveness is to it, is that it's kind of foolproof in a way that you're like, I don't know how to plant this stuff. I'm a new gardener. And then you read the back of the seed packet and you're like, I don't know if I have all this room for these rows.
Just a guideline.
It's just a guideline. Yeah. And so then you're like, oh, here's a square foot method. And then it's it's another guideline, but it kind of makes sense in a visual way when you're looking at a garden. A lot of people can envision a garden in squares, not necessarily in rows. It just kind of depends. Because if you're like, I don't have this much space, it's easier to maintain.
Another pro to the square foot gardening, and Holly and I practice both methods. We do square foot gardening, traditional ground gardening, row gardening, container gardening. We do straw bale gardening. We do all of it. So it's not that we're trying to entice you to take this particular direction. We're just giving you the information so you can decide what would be most beneficial for you in your particular growing situation. It's a fast setup. It's easy to build. Just get some 2 by 8s or 2 by 10s, 2 by 12 lumber. Make a 4 by 4 square foot bed, treated or untreated. We know now that the treated lumber does not contain arsenic which did 15, 20 years ago. It contains a copper preservative to make it more water resistant, and based on your research, some people believe that's okay, other people don't, so you can figure out what you want. And you fill it with good enriched soil. Mm-hmm. It gives the plants, it's a great way to set up and a great way to produce a lot of produce.
So let's talk about some cons here to square foot gardening.
Okay.
One is that it's not ideal necessarily for all crops. If you have a crop that takes up a lot of room, like a vining crop, like a squash, cucumber, bean, well, you could trellis the cucumbers, but a squash you can't really trellis that, or melons. You may have to be strategic in how you grow those, put them near the edge, or think about where they're going to be. You can't just put them smack dab in the middle of your garden.
Right. This is a great concept for bush beans or carrots, onions, radishes, the small stuff, lettuces, spinaches that do not take, lots of square foot to grow. So that's kind of a con there. Also, it can be kind of pricey to set up because you're buying lumber, you're buying some type of material. In most instances, you're doing this in a raised bed, and you're purchasing soil and bringing in, filling that with the enriched soil, which you're purchasing.
Right. Also, one thing they mention here is in the book, it says that 6 inches is deep enough to grow in. That's not necessarily true. You probably want about 12 inches.
Right. If you're going to do icicle radishes, which is a white cylindrical radish that grows deep, that can grow 6-8 inches in length. We've had them grow in 15-inch high containers, the whole depth of the container. Mm-hmm. So by having that shallow depth, you're going to restrict the roots and even the root development of some of these bigger root crops like beets and rutabagas and turnips to get, and forget about carrots or parsnips if you're even going to go 6 inches. That's not even worth it. It's not going to grow very good.
Right, so you have to consider that, and that's another con to think about. But knowing that knowledge, that you would just make it deeper. Right.
Let's talk about some pros about traditional row gardening like many of us are familiar with. One, it's pretty low cost. You just take and you dig a plot of land, and you set up a grid type of, here's 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, space them evenly, plant your seeds or your starts, and you're good to go. So it's pretty easy to do that. That's a low cost, and you do want to kind of look at the soil. You might need get a soil test to find out.
Well, that's the thing is that you might not know what your soil is going to be like. You don't know if you have good soil, if you have terrible soil, soil with like some sort of chemicals in it possibly.
Right.
So that's something you have to consider is what lies beneath.
Right. Also, the advantages to a traditional row garden, not a raised, it doesn't dry out as quick. So with a square foot garden method, you're planting them so intensely, so tightly that they can dry out because they're sucking up so much moisture so quickly. A pro to the row garden is less competition. You don't have them as intensely planted as you would in a square foot garden method. A con to the row garden method, usually you're going to have to deal with weeds early on in the years of establishing it. Once you get those gardens established and remove the weeds regularly, you're not going to have that big of an issue with weeds. We've worked on this for years and years and years. 5 years, 6 years, and we're getting to the point where the weeds are at a very minimum because what weeds do up here we remove before they go to seed, and we're cleansing the garden beds of that.
Right. So it's intricate work a bit, but at the same time it's going to save us some time down the road. So, but if you are a traditional row gardener, that's what works for you. Keep doing it.
Well, let's do this example of the space, the amount of produce you can put in one versus the other.
Okay, so we're going to do radishes as an example. You have a 4 by 8 foot bed, so that's 32 square feet. So it's 16 plants per square foot when it comes to radishes, which is 512 radishes. So in the same bed, if you do 4 rows, 1 foot apart, seed space 1 per inch, that's 96 plants per row. 384 radishes. So that's a difference of 128 radishes more. You get more with the square foot method.
Right. And if you just go, let's do another one. Bush beans are more reasonable.
Right, bush beans.
Yeah, because a lot of people most people don't want to grow 384 radishes.
Right. So bush beans, same bed, 9 plants per square foot, 288 bean plants. Or 4-inch rows, 4-inch spacing, or 4 rows, 4-inch spacing, 1 foot apart. That's 96 plants. That's a difference of 192. That's quite a bit.
Right, especially if you're wanting to produce a lot to can. So many of us grew up with row gardening. Many of us, we did that and we didn't know any different. With the square foot gardening, it gives the plants, you get a lot more plants in 1 square foot. but it can be, a problem because there's diseases and less air to circulate the plant. So hopefully that gives you some idea between the pros and the cons with the square foot gardening versus row gardening, and you can look into it more on your end and figure out what's going to work best for you.
Thank you for checking out the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Radio Show. For more, go to the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com for full-length in-studio video and podcast replay of Season 1. Season 2 underway and added weekly. Tweet us at TWVG Show or hashtag TWVG to be part of the program.